Thank you to GameWare Create for being a channel partner. Looking for a Kickstarter game you missed or 3D printed minis? GameWare Create has a huge selection available, all at a fair price. Use the link in the description below to check out all that GameWare Create has to offer. What's up, Rockstars, and welcome to my speed review for Chronicles of Drunagor, Age of Darkness by Creative Game Studio. Is this game everything it's cracked up to be? Is it worth the price? I hope to answer a few of those questions for you right after this. As always, I'd like to give a huge shout out to my patrons and YouTube members. It is through their financial support that this channel is possible. And it's because I take no money from any game developer, so I can give you my honest opinion and not my wallet's opinion. If you appreciate that level of honesty when covering the game industry, there's a link down below that you can use, and I greatly appreciate it. If not, though, that's fine too. A like on the video tells me plenty, and of course a comment telling me that this video was helpful is obviously good as well. And I really appreciate it. Seriously, pause the video at any time and let me know what you think about the speed review. If you like it, if you don't, if you think it can be improved or not, I'd love to hear from you. This is my first time doing it, so we'll see how things go. The box storage isn't great. I don't know where to put the doors, and there's baggies of stuff, and it's just all on the top of it, and when I put it vertically to store it, I hear things move around. It could definitely be improved there, and there's a lot of separate game trays there, and that's always annoying. It was in Super Fantasy Brawl, and it is here. The token tray particularly is not good. It's hard to get the pieces, and you can't see which pieces are there. It's way too packed, and overall just needs to be spread out more as opposed to big, long rows of them. One of the nice things, though, is that they have the colored base rings that we get in so many games, but these are soft, which means they are friendly to painted miniatures, so that you don't get those hard plastic ones that scrape the paint off of the rim if you paint them like all the other ones. I much prefer this soft version. The rulebook doesn't teach well, which is kind of the whole point of a rulebook. There is an errata that's available online, but it still has issues. You have questions that pop up, like why is there a gem slot on weapons? There's some unique symbols on the character board that are never mentioned anywhere else, and just a host of other odd scenarios and situations, like how darkness goes around elevation and stuff like that. That being said, there is a start here guide that is very well done. It is nice to go through. It has a little bit of a story, and in general is just what actually teaches you how to play the game. Highly recommended. Do not skip that. Go ahead and play it, even if you've already read the rulebook. Now, personally, I've been spoiled by spiral bound books quite a lot lately with a lot of the Kickstarter deliveries that we've been having around this time, and that makes setup kind of annoying when you don't have it because the book won't stay open. So the book shows you where the different map tiles go and where to put it all, but then when you sit it down to put those on, it closes itself. This spiral bound would really benefit that, I think, a lot. Speaking of setup, it takes a long time. It would be nice to know what I'll need for each mission, just because there's so many variability in there, and I understand that you kind of explore the dungeon, so you don't know what's coming up, but it could still easily tell me, hey, these tiles, hey, these 3D elements. If nothing else, I think that'd be helpful, so I'm not digging in the box every time I open a door. Now, as for the 3D maps themselves, I'm not actually sold on this. I'm not putting it as a positive or negative, but it is nice. It does look nice, and the elevation is always typically a good thing. It adds a little bit more strategy to things. However, it adds a lot to the storage, and the setup is kind of iffy as well. So whether or not that outweighs the kind of finickiness of the setup is, of course, I think up to the individual person. For me, I am indifferent. Speaking of the map trays, it could be improved a little bit. I would love to see a slot at the bottom where the level 1 map tiles could just kind of slide into to kind of lock them in place so they're not moving around underneath the 3D elements. I just think that would just be super helpful. And then finally on this, the table sprawl is really messy thanks to a lot of cards and map changes. If you are getting this retail, be sure to grab the Spoils of War expansion and maybe even those hero trays that they also sold. Very much recommended. If nothing else, the very long version of the cards. It saves you about 12 to 13 different cards. It's much more organized and just definitely recommended. Otherwise, you have cards for all of your items, you have cards for all of your skills, and you have cards for all of your class abilities and your role, and it's just a lot of cards, and it gets a little messy, and definitely kind of a big table space too. And that goes for the map as well, because the map is variable. You don't know if it's going to be wide or tall or angled or whatever it might be, and so you end up moving the map around in the middle of the table quite often as you explore new areas, and sometimes you even have to turn them around and stuff like that. I tend just to remove old parts of it, especially once it's covered in darkness. I just don't care anymore. Now, the main thing you're doing in this game is placing cubes on actions, and I'm here to tell you that it is great. It's a fantastic system. If you think about it, it's kind of like the gems you get in like Conan or Batman Gotham City Chronicles or Dark Rituals or anything like that, where you have essentially a resource that you can spend. However, unlike those where there's just one gem, this is multiple gems or multiple cubes, where the red cubes are your range, and the blue cubes are your wisdom, and the green cubes are your agility, and the yellow cubes are your melee. And so you have a lot more decisions to make. Certain ones go to certain places, or you can change different things. And so the combination of cube used and the skill it's placed on is always interesting. You're always giving up something. It's not just giving up a action. It's I'm giving up a ranged action, or I'm giving up a melee action to block or do whatever. Or I'm going to go ahead and, do a tumble through here with my agility. And so I'll dodge that damage, but that also means that I now can't do my leap attack because that would have used my cube. So it's very, very good. It's included in the level up system. I'll talk about that later, but as the main form of interacting with this game, it was always a pleasure to do. Now, for the last bit of component quality, I'm actually going to give this a negative. The cubes to activate scream for a double layer board where you have two thick cardboard tiles kind of sandwiched together so you can slot in the cube. If you knock a table while playing Chronicles of Drunagor, you are going to move things around and you're not going to be very happy. As I play with my kids, this sometimes happens and it's never a good thing. The card skills would be nice as thicker cardboard as well, kind of like the tiles from Conan or Batman Gotham City Chronicles. Also, the print on all cards, even the ones that appear in the books, would be nice. So there are actually more enemies than what you see miniature-wise, and that's because as you're exploring the adventure book, it'll say use this card stats instead, and it'll have a different card, but you don't have a card that actually matches that. You'll use a stand-in. I would prefer to have everything I need printed out. Another great thing about this is the doors. They are fantastic, and there's story within the gameplay. So instead of a normal thing where you just have to open a door and go to the next part of the map you don't know about, but it's not random. Instead, when you open the door, you open the actual folding door and actually see what the next layout is. And you'll place that layout, and sometimes a special event will happen, but there's always a little bit of story as well. I mentioned in my coverage of Daenerys and Arena how I would like to get away from the block of story and the gameplay, block of story gameplay in most narrative games. They're all separated. There is no real connection between the gameplay and the story part of it. So having a little bit of story throughout is wonderful. Additionally, the character selection is good. So when you go to pick out a character, you're going to have a big choice of characters and they all feel very different. You'll be doing different things even in the same class. So 2 druids will not play the same, or 2 shadow knights will not play the same, or 2 paladins will not play the same. You will have uniqueness and a certain flair for that specific character. Additionally, the points of interest are an awesome RPG element. They provide hard choices and are limited in choices too, and that's always great. Which really just brings me to this great RPG element that this game has. You have all the classes, you have all the races. It feels like D&D, the board game, more than any other game I've played, including Arena. It is very much that kind of going on a quest, talking to NPCs, interacting with a puzzle, doing all that. In fact, Arena is the only other one I know that does puzzles quite like this, though I think in Arena it's a little bit more riddle, or this one's a little bit more trial and error. But either way, you'll come across different levers that are different colors, and you have to kind of figure out how to deal with that. Or you'll startle someone and they'll pull out a knife, and you'll need to figure out how to talk them down from attacking you, or maybe they will. Or you come across a chest that has like a glow coming out of it, and you need to figure out what to do there, and you can move the chest because you see a little thing underneath it. Or there's all these kind of elements that you're doing, or talking with NPCs while playing the game, to where the story never really stops, and you always feel like you're on an RPG adventure, and I really, really enjoyed that. The activation order is nice as well, especially for strategy. It is much like Storm Sunder in this, where you have a line that shows when each person is going, and then you get to decide who does what based on that, so you know exactly when the enemy is going to attack. And because their AI is known and not random, you even know what exactly they would do, and that makes it to where this game can be highly strategic if you needed to. That being said, the game isn't necessarily the hardest game ever, and therefore the strategy is a little bit limited in that sense, but still the activation order was a nice level of strategy. Runes are good and they interact with the activation order as well. So at the end of a round, you will draw a rune and place it on the activation track. That then in turn affects different things as whatever is activated on the green rune, for instance, will interact with how many runes are drawn for that. It's a little bit of randomness, but changes things up a little bit and adds a little bit of variety. Closest thing I could compare it to is adding a item or equipment on a mob in Massive Darkness, where you have the same mob, but because of it has a sword versus a bow, it's going to act a little bit different. Same with these runes, that's how they interact there. Bosses are handled really well. They're constantly activating, and it definitely feels like a boss gauntlet. You typically have a little bit of an arena you're fighting them in, and they do unique things each time, and they're always acting and just changing things up depending on what it is that you're doing, and that's just a good feel for it. It doesn't feel like a normal fight. They have their own little bit of mechanics involved. Each one's a little unique, and that was really enjoyable that it felt different than normal combat. However, the bosses don't always feel like they themselves are really doing too much. There's not as much straightforward kind of come and attack you as you would think. Instead, it's a lot of other kind of magical stuff and auras and different things like that, teleporting around and whatnot, which is enjoyable, but sometimes it feels like things are happening, but it's not necessarily originating from the boss. Another great positive is actually all of the expansions. They are integrated into the campaign story, which is nice, and they fit right in. I liken it to Rogue One for Star Wars. You can watch Star Wars just fine, and you will enjoy it, but then you can go on this little sub-adventure that explains a little bit more and is good on its own, and it kind of sets up for the next one. If you've ever watched Rogue One and followed immediately with A New Hope, it feels exactly like this here. You'll go through the expansion, and it'll lead right back into the main story, and you will have experienced more or understand the situation a bit more, stuff like that. Additionally, the story pacing I found actually quite good. For instance, early on it has you fight a boss, and I think that's a great move to just get me interested early. If you think about the movie The Lord of the Rings, one of the great things about it is as it's explaining the situation, you're getting used to it, suddenly you're seeing Sauron and all of his might just attacking everyone and being a nasty guy until he gets his finger cut off. And that's kind of the same thing here, where you get this big experience with this big bad guy, and you're like, oh wow, this is it sets the tone and sets the urgency, and I think the pace was quite good there too. And additionally, at least with expansions, which is how I played it, the variety and change of pace was actually kind of nice too, because the expansions add new enemies and typically a new setting or area that you're in with new map tiles and stuff like that. So it constantly keeps it a little bit fresh. And then what I ended up doing was including the expansion enemies in future play sessions. So after I was done with the expansion, now suddenly those enemies could show up again. But I didn't until then, so that they were brand new for that. If you do play through this and you do have the all-in, that is definitely what I encourage you to do. I think it's the best way to play this game. One minor annoyance was moving the turn token around. It's a little bit annoying because the activation tracker is actually two different pieces, and then you have cards on the top and the bottom, and then you also have all the runes on the two-piece activation tracker, and then you have this turn tracker that you also move as well. I ended up to stop doing that. I could always remember where I was anyway, and I never used the turn tracker again. I know everybody's curious about luck, and the luck mitigation is there, but there's not really any manipulation. Every now and then you sort of can, and I saw early copies actually allowed you to use an action cube to do a reroll, but that's not really the case here anymore, so what you roll is typically what you get. The level up mechanics are actually nicely paced and strongly felt, and that's one of the reasons for that is because you get an extra action cube too, and that means that even though you're leveling up, you choose the order that you level up in. So if you are a ranged character and you want to level up your ranged abilities, you'll also get a new ranged cube, or perhaps you could actually go for the melee one because it comes with a great passive for the level 1. However, that also just gives you another melee cube, which you may or may not need, so you have to make those choices. It actually lets you keep those choices for quite some time because there's enough things leveling up, but it's at a pace where you'll actually have a few missions with there before you actually level up maybe in some other area. And that was really nice because you get used to your character, and then right when you would maybe get a little bit bored of that, you tended to get a new one. At least that's how I felt. One of the big bummers for me was chests. I normally love getting loot, and I love running to a chest and getting it. However, every chest in this story is trapped. You have to roll a trap die. There are 2 blinks on that, but all the 4 other spots on that die have something nasty happen to you. I do not like trap chests at all. I'd much rather just get a loot. If nothing else, I think it should be reversed, and just every now and then it's trapped instead of almost always trapped. Another thing I'm not a fan of is the ranked enemy style, especially when no AI or really unique moves are present. So all the enemies kind of act the same way, they target the same way, they move typically about the same way, and they tend to do the same sort of actions. So really it's just a stat difference of whether or not they do a cleave or not or something like that, or they're ranged. However, there's not a big variety of them. Now with expansions and with, if you have the all-in, it's good, but if you just have the core game, there's very little variance among the enemies, and instead they rank up from rookie to champion and so on, and that makes them stronger and harder, but at the end of the day you're fighting the same enemies, and so there's only so many times you can spawn skeleton archers before you're a little tired of skeleton archers. Another thing I actually didn't like is darkness. So darkness is actually pretty cool in that it constantly pushes you forward. It's a nice mechanic to do that. However, I found it a little finicky. So on the back of each rune, at the end of the round, you'll draw a rune, and on the back shows a specific shape. You will find that Tetris shape and actually put it on the map, and that's kind of how it sneaks its way through you. And conceptually, I think it's nice, but in practice, it was more finicky than I think it was worth. I would much rather see darkness just become an area. An area is the blue area you see here. It's just 4 squares in a row, and if they were all just areas and then I spawned that, then that would be fine. In fact, you could even put a variance where sometimes you spawn 1, sometimes you spawn 2, and so on. There is variance in where they spawn and how they spawn necessarily, but suffice it to say, I would much rather just have them all cubes than the Tetris style stuff. It just is, it's hard to kind of piece them together sometimes. They fit really tight, so I'm worried about the longevity of the components when they fit in tight together, and overall this becomes a little bit messy. And then the rules are a little bit more than I think they need to be. If I would streamline anything in this game besides the card count and just, have the area of your hero board, it would be the darkness 100%. I think that should be streamlined to still have its effect, still have its purpose, but not be such an involved mechanic. One of the last things I wanted to mention is that they have companions in this game and pets, and I think both acted quite well. It's very nice to have companions, especially interesting ones. I think it's very cool to be able to have that, and as a huge fan of pet classes, I of course had to have a pet wolf, in which case I did, and I loved whistling for him to go attack people and make them bleed. So in summary, I think Chronicles of Drunagor, Age of Darkness by Creative Game Studios is a fantastic RPG game that's focused on the RPG side of things, and that seems to show in its lack of focus in a few other areas like enemy variety and some fiddly gameplay. I enjoyed my time with it immensely and plan to continue to play well after this review. If Creative Game Studios can work on the few shortcomings, the next iteration of this game can be truly one of my favorite games in my collection. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know how you liked this review, if you liked my version of a speed review, if it was helpful for you. If you have any questions at all, I know normally I give more examples of things. Let me know in the comments below. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you guys again really soon with a review of the Apocalypse version of this game. That'll be coming shortly. All right, that's it. Thank you so much, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.